Okay, next week we celebrate. Well, you got it. Next week we celebrate Tisha BAv. And I say celebrate or commemorate. That's going to be the focus and the organization of this talk tonight. Keep it in the back of your mind as we go through the different points, whether we're talking celebration or we're talking commemoration. In simple terms, the difference is that we celebrate something that's a good for Yisrael, a good for the individual, and so on. And we commemorate things that were not so good. Okay, so now we're in Tisha BAv. Tisha BAv commemorates the destruction of the Second Temple, and with it, the sovereignty of Yisrael, which at that time was built around the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, now that's obviously a commemoration and not a celebration. Even though, historically, the impact of the destruction of the temple, of the Second Temple, apparently was not as bad and as potent as it's been made out to be heretofore. The contemporary historian in historical research points out that there was somehow a very quick, in those terms, maybe 70 years, 50 years, a very quick recovery from the destruction and even Beitar and the Roman destruction, and the welcoming of Chazal, of the institution of Torah Sheba'al Peh and the Rabbanim. So this is something just to keep in mind historically, that it wasn't as it was played up to be, because I learned from the couple of books that I read on the topic, I took it for granted that the impact was unbelievably devastating. Apparently it wasn't that much. However, in the terms of tonight, that is definitely a commemoration, we remember. Okay, but built into that, there's an emerging hope for restoration, which, as the centuries rolled on, and especially in Chazal that we're now inheriting the whole center of Yisrael, the hope for restoration began to increase and play a big role in the Jewish people and the survival of the Jewish people and so forth. That's a separate issue. We're not going to talk about that tonight, as to what were the ingredients in Klal Yisrael such that they were able to rebound from so many situations of destruction or semi-destruction. What were the ingredients in Klal Yisrael? Were they belief ingredients? Were they emotional sensitivity? Was it practicality, that they were, in a sense, they were able to separate off ideas from workables, from problems and problems to be solved? That deserves a separate treatment, and we'll do it at some time on a broad historical scale as to what the success was. And just b'derech hagav, the practicality of being the money lenders, and in the beginning the glass blowers. I read a beautiful piece that in the early centuries, glass blowing was known only to the Hebrews. And therefore they had some in, as the time went on, they had some in with royalty of being able to blow glass. Okay, that's a separate issue. But now we're talking about hope for restoration. Okay. That's beginning to start on the positive side. That we had a destruction, but okay. We could have knuckled under and become so involved in depression that we would never be able to pull out. Instead of that, there was this renewed hope for restoration. Okay. I personally, as you know, I consider this entry into Chazal, namely the world of the Talmud, I personally consider that to be on a par with Newton's apple, where one of the great, if not the greatest contribution, intellectual contribution to Western civilization is the nomos, a narrative which we call the Talmud. The legal detail embedded in a ideational structure wherein the aspects and the bases are discussed in what we call Torah Shebaal Peh and the Agarata and so forth. So this, I consider it a tremendous, tremendous event, and indeed, the beginning or the entry into the primacy of Chazal after the destruction is something to celebrate. It's something great. It's not to commemorate. Okay. But again, these come off with the destruction. Okay. Destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. The end of animal sacrifice. And other forms of korban, but especially the animal sacrifices. Now, I couldn't read Vayikra when I went to shul and they were reading Vayikra. I used to stand up, take a book in English, especially, so they see I'm not studying a sefer or something. Take a book and hold it up, go like this, go around, and show everybody that I'm not following the reading. I could not follow the reading of 2-3 chapters in Vayikra with any reasonability of knowing reading the English or not knowing the words or whatever. But the whole picture that comes through said to me, that can't be so significant. That can't be so important. And indeed, it's something backwards. And then, of course, I read the Rambam, which we'll talk about a little later. And in the famous Rambam, he says that the work of sacrifices in Yisrael was a concession to the time. The environment was such that other nations had temples and sacrifices, and in order for the Jews, Yisrael, the Hebrews, to make some kind of a continued existence and success, they had to institute sacrifices, but it's really, a substitute was tefillah bimkom korban, prayer instead of sacrifices. And that was an advance. We'll talk about that a little bit later, a little bit about the Ramban controversy on this particular point. But that is certainly an advance. So out of this destruction came something that somebody like the Rambam was a big advance and a great bracha for Yisrael. Okay. So as I say, I couldn't read the text in the shul. Of course, 40 years later, I consider that text in Vayikra to be most important because it deals with the topic of korban, including the animal sacrifice. Why that's the case, we will see towards the end of the discussion. Okay, but this was the story. So we have a thankfulness for tefillah bimkom korban, and we have this built solidly on the Rambam. So in Rav Tzadok Eichik's book, one of his books, he brings down the point. In the guide, Maimonides sees in sacrifice just an educational method of elevating the Jews above such forms of worship. This is the Rav's words. It's not the text, but it's informative to hear how the Rav packages it in the note. So previously, sacrifice had been the common practice of the heathens among whom the Jews had lived. In order to direct the Jew forward towards worship of God, the Torah made the concession of animal sacrifices. Ramban, Nachmanides, severely criticizes Maimonides for his rationalization and introduced his own interpretation. Sacrifice for him, for the Ramban, refers actually to man himself. Worship is nothing but mental sacrifice. And animal sacrifice symbolizes the internal act of self-negation. Now, we should stop to ponder the machloket. First of all, the Rambam puts it educational. It's an educational thing, and it's a concession for the continued existence of Klal Yisrael. And the Ramban disagrees strongly and says that this procedure called the korban, the sacrifice, the animal sacrifice, was a symbolic representation or a symbolization of the person bringing the korban, such that he would identify with the animal when the animal was killed. So this was in effect he being punished or being killed for the Aveirah, for whatever he's coming to sacrifice for. And that involved, as a fundamental tenet, the self-negation of the person. Now, I might as well introduce that point now. When we read the Chumash, I discovered that the paradigm case of sacrifice is korban shogeg, namely unintentional wrongdoing. This is embedded in the 6 or 8 types of sacrifice that are listed in Vayikra. Now, it's very difficult to say, well, how do you get the idea that shogeg is the paradigm? It's not the first, for example, and it's amidst the rest. In my view, in the historical picture, much of what's written in the Chumash, be it Devarim itself, the whole Sefer, or other pieces of the text, were incorporated, were written later than Moshe Rabbeinu time. And indeed, when it comes to this list and description of the different korbanot, I myself the only sense I make in reasonability is that these korbanot are being projected onto the text of the Mishkan. We're not dealing with a temple, but they're being projected from the temple period. So that the list of korbanot in the Chumash are not necessarily de facto the type of korban that was operative in Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, you can't prove something like that, because I mean, you're dealing with a text. You don't have any cross-cultural sources for the support, so you've got to somehow make that stick. But the point was that there's such a thing called korban shogeg, and that's on every TV show. I mean, all the programs, the police program, this program, that program, medical program. What happens? Somebody unintentionally does something, and he remains with guilt, and in bad cases, depression, blockage of work, and so forth. You know what I mean? He's exonerated morally. He didn't do anything wrong. It's shogeg. He didn't do it by intention. Okay? But even though he's exonerated by the law, by morality, by people, he still has the guilt. So korban shogeg functioned in the person to eliminate, empirically, to eliminate the guilt that's blocking the person from creative work and everything else. And the main point here is that process, upon analysis, which is not for tonight, the detail, the analysis, how that korban worked. In the Perush, I discussed and I put forth a scenario of how that works, so that the reader will get a dugma, will have an example of how korban worked empirically. Namely, the test was, is he going to have the guilt or not? If he persists in having the guilt, the korban wasn't successful. But the point right now is that upon analysis of the korban, it rested very strongly on self-affirmation. In other words, in that Korban process, it was not like the Ramban says, and very suggestive, because I held that for many years. And it's reasonable. It sounds reasonable. The person is identified with the animal is sacrificed, and so it sounds reasonable. But upon discovery, I saw that involved here is self-affirmation. In other words, there was the differentiation of the person from the animal, such that if he himself would feel or build on that self-affirmation and say, I know that the situation is coming from somewhere, it's nothing to do with me, I'm not in this. Well, then that's going to play a role in the empirical development where he has a conclusion on the shogeg. So upon analysis, we see a different focus. Self-negation was when the Beit HaMikdash was Kayam, self-negation was essential for the human being on the personal plane and on the existent plane for Klal Yisrael. These were essential to come close to Hashem in the Rav's language. So this is an important point to keep in mind in the back of the head, that there's a problem here as to how we see the Korban and the Korban Shogeg in particular. So it turns on self-affirmation. To give you a modern piece, people in psychotherapy, people in analysis know that when they deal with clients, they have to run run on a line where they can't hit the person too much. If you hit the person too hard, there's a reaction that only reinforces the difficulty of the problem. There has to be a kind of a line where on the one hand you recognize the reality, whatever it happens to be, but on the other hand you don't negate, you don't self-negate, you don't put too much negation into the picture. In Rab Nachman of Breslov's language, you can't give l'chav zchut, namely to judge somebody else for the better, unless you judge yourself for the better. A very big point and motif in all of Rab Nachman, one of the key passages in the whole Likutei text on this orientation, and very, very psychologically deep and true. Okay. In Tefillah, we have this now, we have Tefillah Bimkom Korban. Okay. Now in Tefillah, we have in the Halakha three categories of prayer. One is bakasha, making request. One is praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for different things, for the Bria itself and all the rest, and life events and so on. And the other one is to give honor, give kavod. And in the different Yom Tovim and Chanukah and Purim, we read the extra piece for the Shemon Esrei, and we're talking about by Modim. We have in the Shemon Esrei, we have the Hoda'ah, the thankfulness, we have the appreciation, and we have the praise. And this is a beautiful sugyot in the halakha of how these are blended together. But our concern today, in relation to the topic of Tefillah Bimkom Korban, is bakasha, request. So now the question becomes, well, Tefillah Bimkom Korban, Tefillah Bakasha Bimkom Korban, is that to be celebrated or to be commemorated? Or how do we look at that? Well, Tefillah Bimkom Korban, how do you know when Hashem answers your prayer?
Material.
How do you know? The fact is you don't. The fact is you don't know whether he answers your prayer. There's some rules about bakasha in the halacha. You can't ask something that's impossible. Like you had a child that was born, or you got information, it was in the womb, it was a male, you can't ask for it to be a female. So, I mean, okay, but within the rules of the tefillah, of tefillat bakasha, on the overall plane, one never knows whether or not Hashem answered the prayer. Because if something came good, pleasant, and wanted, okay, you take that. But something comes unpleasant and not wanted, well, then what do you do? I mean, well, the tendency is to say you didn't do enough kavanah, you didn't do enough immersion in the prayer or whatever, and so Hashem didn't answer. Okay, it's kind of a weak answer, but basically you have to live with tefillah bimkom korban in a mode of uncertainty. We'll get to this when we come to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, because in the Yom Kippur process of the korban for Yom Kippur, when we send the animal out into the midbar with a red tag on it, in the description in the Chumash, we never know whether the animal got killed by another animal or fell off the rocks, couldn't sustain life or sustain life. The message of Yom Kippur in that beautiful part of the service of the Korban is that we have to live with uncertainty. We never have closure and full certainty when it comes to the whole orientation of Tefillah Bimkom Korban. In the Agadah and in the Halacha, there's an emphasis to put, oh yes, the animal was killed by another animal or by it couldn't sustain life, there was no food or whatever. But in the Chumash per se, there's no indication of that. That the animal, because the kapara, or the solution, came with the animal being killed. That was the kapara. Okay, that will come to, I hope, in detail when we come to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and we talk a little bit about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and how they relate and so forth. We'll deal with that again. Okay, and some very interesting things that come out. Okay. Good. Everything would be fine if you bypass this weakness or this inadequacy in tefillah bimkom korban. Okay. But the whole thrust of the Gemara and the Drash is there will be a Bayit Shlishi. There will be a third temple. So the question becomes, in our theme for tonight, organizational, how we're supposed to look at that. If I didn't open the Chumash of Vayikra at that time, when it was other nations, you went to India, or you went to Egypt, you traveled to Mesopotamia, okay, so you weren't such a big shock. If you come back and you say, "Whoa, I saw a temple," and so on, okay, so it looks similar to ours, but ours is significantly different because it has to do with Hashem and so on. But okay, in our time, the building of a Beit HaMikdash, well, Joel Levinson would say, "My God, I can't even hold the sefer. Never mind open it. How can we talk about Bayit Shlishi, third temple? What does that mean? Third temple? That if we had a videotape of Bayit Sheni, we would have more or less similar video, audio input. Is that what we're talking about? Well, if we are, boy, that mavagels and voids the whole analysis up to here. I mean, be content with tefillah bimkom korban. Okay, with that caveat that we talked about, but be content with the Rambam point and the Rambam himself and everybody else in halacha affirms that there will be a Bayit Shlishi, a third temple. So now are we going backwards? Whenever I gave this talk in the States, for many people in the audience, they just, you watch the fidgeting and the body action and everything. they couldn't take it. They're assuming I'm going to come in and affirm with fullness of mental, with full mind, that I'm going to affirm Bayit Shlishi. Well, before I even opened my mouth, there was this, what? You're going to affirm Bayit Shlishi? That's going backwards. So our question is, what is Bayit Shlishi? What are we talking about? And how does it relate now to this issue of commemoration? It's a bracha or a klala? It's going backwards or not going backwards? Going forwards. Okay. Bayit Shlishi, backwards or forwards? Well, in order to answer, we have to know something about the Korban and the Korban system. What was the Korbanot system? So based on this finding about the primacy of Korban Shogeg, which was empirical, which led to a result, if successful, where the guilt was dissipated, weakened, removed entirely, such that the person can get on with their life and use the energy, what they have, for creative purposes in people, relationships, work, and so forth. So what was Korban? I generalized that. I generalized Korban Shogeg to all Korbanot. And what was the Korban system? Whether it was animal sacrifice or mincha, grain sacrifice, or whatever the details were, this was a set of procedures which functioned to restore lost life energy. We'll use the term, again, life energy with no explanation except any kind of an intuitive picture that you bring to it. Its use of the term in my writings is no worse and no better than in the healing tradition, who uses the same word, in other tradition, in Buddhism and in Hinduism, they use life force, life flux. There are synonym words in different systems, even though they're talking about something different than what I'm talking about. But the word, the phrase, has this dimension to it that it's not energy in physics, but it's some kind of a, I can't talk. Something, call it spiritual, call it whatever you want. But every word you use means that you've got to do the talking to explain what that means. But the word spiritual doesn't help unless you clarify all of that. So we got into a difficult problem of what it means. However, by intimation, everybody knows what I said. At some we call it the life force. We call it the thrust. We have different words. The thrust of the person. The will operating in a very strong way in a person pulls them towards the thing or drives into somebody from inside. Being pulled from the outside. Being pushed from the inside. What's somehow it's involving, loosely speaking, forces in the person. And so for me, generalizing from the Shogeg example, the Korban system was an empirical process of maintaining, sustaining, and enriching the life energy of the person. When a person did wrongdoings, and made intentional wrongdoings or unintentional wrongdoings, whenever there was a decrease in the availability of energy for productive, creative use, the Korban system functioned. I added enriched. In the Korban, we're talking about of a shogeg, something was lost. Look, the person going around in a state of semi-depression is a loss to that person. I mean, the person is not there to, like Rav Nachman says, one thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates is depression. Mm-hmm. And masochism and self-hatred and all the rest of the dimensions that we pick up from the psychoanalytic field. Okay, so if we now say with this generalization that the Korban system is a process which leads to a restoration of life energy in the person. When it's weakened by something, an aver or whatever, and then gets strengthened by a process. Now, one should realize, something I never realized for a long time, that in the process there was talk in addition to what the Kohen does. It wasn't, the impression you get from reading the text is, well, here was the thing that he did. The Korban, he did this, he spilled the blood, set up the space. We'll talk about some other time in detail of what was going, some of these things that were going on, what was sprinkling the blood all about, and so on and so on. Okay, but the point is that there was this picture, and one would think, well, where's the talking? There's no talking in the description. It doesn't say the Kohen said this and the Kohen said that. It was all doing. But my guess is that included in the doing was talk, was discourse, was relation. And so it wasn't left to chance that the person in the Korban Shogeg should have reaffirmation. Well, it could have been that it was mentioned in one way or another and then infused together with the process of what was being done. So it's a kind of a mixture. The process itself, the Korban process of energy states and transformations, is itself a kind of a mixture of words, of intellection, with feeling and the process of killing the animal and so on and so on and so on. So I think, if I'm right, this is the way we should look at the Korban. It's the recovery of lost life energy. Something very interesting to indirectly exemplify this is, I said enrich. Certain korbanot are for recovery of something that was lost. Here's the normal person in a condition. Everybody in any condition has a balance of life energy operating in different ways. But here was, in relation to this, the norm, which shifts all the time, but in relation to this, the norm, and then we have a person who's not exemplifying the norm, he's below the gvul. So we want to restore the energy to bring him back to where he was before he had this problem of doing something b'shogeg, unintentional. So one of the indications of this is that this operates not only in the individual, but it operates in the Tibur, in Klal Yisrael. When the Klal Yisrael itself, as a big people entity, also requires restoration or advancement, enrichment. Lo and behold, if you look in the text on the holidays, the korbanot for the holidays, before Klal Yisrael did the devastating sin of the golden calf, there is no restoration talk concerning the korbanot for those holidays, because nothing was lost. You're coming in as the normal people, and we're starting to celebrate this holiday through the korban as part of the thing, and so it's taking us from where we are now into an enriched state of simcha, an enriched state of that energy, a qualitative change upward, a quantitative change, more and better, as it called enrichment. But after that sin of the Egel HaZahav, of the golden calf, when you look at the statement of the korbanot in the Chumash system, you see there's kapara, restoration. So again, one could ask the question, like I asked, so why before the Egel HaZahav, before the golden calf, there was no mention of kapara? It wasn't restoring anything lost, it was enriching what we have now. And the only answer that I gave that made reasonable sense was the one I just presented. So you have an indication of this being operative. Okay. So coming back now. Bayit Shlishi. How are we to look at it? Well, on this analysis, it certainly is a great bracha. Because here was a procedure, a process, the end of which was a success in restoring or enriching the energy in the person. Well, that's a great thing. That Klal Yisrael should always be in self-negation, always be looking at the Avera side of itself, and so forth, is not the best orientation to be in with respect to livability, with respect to the use of this energy for life, for creative purpose, for work. Sometime we'll talk, incidentally, about work, the concept of work. Because in the Chumash and in the Torah system there's avodah and there's malacha. Malacha is melech. Malacha is the word for kingly work. And indeed, until the time when Yisrael and other peoples entered into citification and big society, and work became a curse, so that we needed a Yom Shvi'i of a Shabbat to rest from the hard work of the 6 days. Until that happened, work was a bracha. The Shabbat did not exist to rest for the Shabbat. The Shabbat was a day of rest and increased. It increased. The Korban Shabbat was an enrichment. You didn't lose anything. There was an enrichment, such that when you went to work during the week, you were at a higher plane than you were by being tired. So that the thing switched, and work became a weakness, a curse. That man, and indeed in the Chumash, right, where man had to work hard to get agriculture and do the rest of the things. So that's a whole topic in itself, which we'll talk about, and deserves a full treatment in terms of avodah, when the text uses avodah, and when the text uses malacha. One of the points, side points is, which we'll get back to that other time, is that avodah relates to work that has rules. So the work of the Kohen in Korbanot followed a set of procedures, a technical set of procedures, and that's called avodah. But in building the Mishkan and other things, where it's malacha, because we're talking now about the whole process of mental and physical and actional and feeling activity that goes into creating something, making something. What a bracha of the human being to be able to make something, to make a chair. I mean, we take it for granted. The Mikra happened to see a video on Helen Keller. And it's just this week. It was a video there, I don't know, MGM, whatever it was. A movie, not a documentary. And they portrayed the early years. We usually know her from the later years of achieving success with language, but the actress who was playing it and the whole movie there was a movie, MGM, you know. And so they showed how difficult it was for her to get to the idea that a word represents a thing, that a sound represents something I do. Wow! You should see the movie. I mean, the girl was bouncing up and down and getting... What we take as a simple given for a newborn at age 2 was you cried. I mean, you cried in the situation. How much it took for that person, deaf and blind, from birth, to be able just to get the rudiment of when a sound from the mother or from the nanny in the picture related to touch. When she touched her, and that was relating. Well, I heard Piaget once in 3 conferences at NYU, who said in 2 out of the 3, he's studying the child all his life, and as far as he's concerned, this is Piaget, not a college professor, this is Piaget. And he said that for him, it's a total miracle that the child, normal, without brain damage and so on, learns to speak a language. And unbelievable it is. So true. Of the complication and the development that is involved. Okay, so we're in this question of how do we look at Bayit Shlishi. Well, the hint comes not only from what I just said, which has to do with maintenance and transformation of energy states, okay? But it also comes from the Gemara, which says, we have to listen to that for the politics of Harabaya and so on, but the Gemara says that Bayit Shlishi will come down ready-made from the Shamayim, from the heaven. Well, the way I look at that is to say the only thing that comes down from the Shamayim are laws of the Bria. Hashem put laws into the creation, into the different levels of creation. The lowest level of creation is the physical world that we deal with in physics. And the next higher plane of creation is what we would call loosely the spiritual world, or the world of the neshama, or the world of life energy, or the world of life thrust, or life flux. All of these terms are now putting together to indicate that there are in the universe laws other than the laws of physics. We have made great success in Western civilization on the laws of physics since Newton and Newton's apple. Okay? We have tremendous, we have all buildings and everything. Most of what we see around us today in buildings and bridges and everything else is Newtonian physics. Electromagnetics is Newtonian physics and so on. And then with the 20th century revolution in micro and macro physics and quantum and relativity, and the emerging technologies that are going with that, the computer included and so on, we're in the upswing of the opening up of the universe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made for understanding the laws. So on this view, what comes down from the top, are laws of the Bayit Shlishi system. In other words, what's going on here? If it's a process that's yielding results, it's resting on certain regularities on the lowest order. In psychoanalysis and in psychotherapy and so forth, we don't have any big science. Some would argue like, we don't have science at all, but we have regularities. We have statistical correlations. And so the practitioner can use that and have these generalities and so forth to help heal the patient. So we're not dealing with high-level science or science at all, but we have these things. But in the big picture, just as we have laws of physics, laws of mechanics, electromagnetic laws, we have, in this view of the Torah system, we have that there are other laws which are not reducible to the laws of physics. Now that is a big, big topic and a big, big statement, because throughout the whole history, from the 17th century to including today, there are those who say, Levinson, Feynman, a few others bigger than me, who were physicists, who said and agreed with this, they say, look, you're on the short end, you got to do the talking. Freddie was an old Talmud. Every once in a while, he comes in with a refrain, what are you talking about? And this goes for 15 years. What are you talking about? And talk sense, talk turkey, talk laws. What are the laws? What? And I don't have any answers. I say we're in the state of sensitization literature, where we're making statements and thinking things and looking to the Orient, for example, of trying to get material to set up an ideational field for the emergence of an Einstein of biology. of an Einstein of the Nishtama. In other words, that on my view it will come. But the burden is on me to talk. And there have been people who argue that Enochinami, it's not such a thing. The burden on these people is that even though we've made great successes in physics, we are absolutely zero when it comes to life. The problem today in physics is, how do we understand consciousness? How do we understand life? There was a conference in San Francisco 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and one guy, I think his name was Schwartz, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He was from Hebrew University, and for Hebrew University's 75th anniversary, they had a group of speakers. They invited some high-level speakers, Dickey from Princeton and Wigner. I mean, it was great. But so they had all the what do I want to say? Lost.
Consciousness.
Yeah.
Conscious.
Okay, so that right. So in that talk the guy gave, who was this Nobel Prize winner, he said there was a conference in California about how physics will look, what physics will look like in 20 years. Okay, that's a long span of time. But anyway, how physics will look like in 20 years. And there was a topic on the agenda called consciousness. And then he said, well, look, you know, I'm in particle physics, and I don't really, it doesn't talk to me. I don't relate to it. But it was included as one of the 26 or 27 topics in the area. Okay, I call that life and life energy. Anybody who works or is sensitive or reads the literature understands from the negative we are bankrupt. We are looking for leads of how to approach the life system in such a way that we can build a viable technology on its basis. So what I'm saying is, in relation to the Korban was a set of procedures, you can call it an invention or a technology, where underneath the workability of the Korban, which we're just describing in general empirical common sense terms, that underneath what was going on, there were laws of the human being, laws of how the human being works, laws of the human life system. And today, more and more people who are studying the sensitization literature are immersing in it to try to find clues such that we will make a big advance in the understanding of the life system. I, for one, am very strong on it, very optimistic, but when you set down the conditions that are required, I come up with a blank. Because for me, physics is successful because it can mathematicize the things it's talking about. Whether it's mathematicized in geometry, whether we look at the sun as a circle or it runs in an orbit. The sun ain't no circle, kid. The sun has flares and all kinds of gas and so on, so it's a complicated picture. But for astronomy, if we can represent it in a mathematization, the mathematization allows us to make predictions, which we then can measure and observe and so on and so on. So for me, physics requires mathematization. Well, where's the mathematization for the life system? I haven't got the foggiest idea what it would be. So I'm putting a very strong condition on what it is. However, I'm optimistic that it will come. And if you read Oriental material, you read Oriental understanding packages in Buddhism and so forth, you see that there is this concern to, if we could make it empirical and not metaphysical. And one of the points that comes through, I've been reading some of it this week on something else, and I was immersed in the whole system, and one of the big points is that many things that look like metaphysical states are really projections from the ordinary conscious world. So that there's an ingredient that says, even though we're going to take metaphysics, we're not anti-metaphysical. We're going to take metaphysics. Nevertheless, many more things, phenomena, that we think are metaphysical turn out to be projections or developments or carryovers from consciousness in the ordinary world with a body and so forth. So there is this concern. In the literature, there's even one piece that I read had an essay from Jung to introduce the topic, where Jung was okay with metaphysics. Jung was a metaphysics person, accepted the metaphysical understanding, and said, yes, whatever we can make empirical, great, but I do accept the metaphysical. Freud, on the other hand, there was an article by Freud and a comparison. Freud, on the other hand, was strictly empirical and would accept no metaphysics and principle. If there's one person that I identify in Western civilization, aside from the great Nietzsche and Rousseau, some of my favorites, it's Freud. And one of the reasons is that he was very, very strong on the role of the empirical and the non-acceptance of metaphysical. Now, this does not mean that I hold everything that Freud writes with Christine, consciousness and understanding. His understanding of science was not of the best. He lived into the quantum relativity era, but he didn't incorporate, he didn't get into his bones aspects of the quantum theory, uncertainty, randomness, and so forth, and he didn't get into the macro system of gravitation by Einstein. However, the concern for empirical development, empirical evidence, and measurement, and so forth, is in the Freud, but not in the Jung, and that comes into the picture. Okay, so Bayit Shlishi, on this view, is the name given to the laws, that come down from Shemayim. No Bayit, no house, no Harabayit with people and sacrifice, and no animal sacrifices. My God, we'd be going backwards. I consider that the worst Chilul Hashem in history. And especially for today in Atchalta de Geula, to have a temple with animal sacrifices, where if you had a video from Bayit Sheni and a video for today, and you would see the similarities and so on, I personally consider that a biggest Chilul HaTorah that we have in the world. Because Chazal understood what that means. Even on the issue of Tefillah Bimkom Korban, their understanding was powerful. And unfortunately, this view of Korban as concerned with restoration and enrichment of life energy was eclipsed, was lost in the period of our history. In the Second Temple, Chazal give you the remez, they give you the hint. They say 5 things were not operative in the Korban process in the Second Temple. Well, if you have a TV set and you don't have a switch and you don't have this and you don't have that, it's not going to give you a picture. So an analysis of that Chazal and the affirming Chazal that are around it give you a certain chizuk in the direction that, what, I'm the first one to think of that? No, for sure not. And I always found it as a surprise that the Rambam, who read Nabatean Agriculture, which is a book of Avodah Zarah practices, in order to understand the Torah system, he immersed himself in some of these Avodah Zarah idolatrous literature to get material and to see where we differ. When you have an idea and you have the blessing of being able to get somebody against the idea, whether it's in teaching or in books, well, then you have homework, and that's good. Homework means you work harder to meet the objections. If you just read what everybody says, or you read what you say, and you don't criticize it, or don't have the opportunity to have others criticize it, well, then you may miss a lot of things. So it was always a surprise to me. How did the Rambam miss the point that Korban was something that was more similar than different in the ancient world? In the ancient world, it was a practice, and it probably was cross-cultural. And they learned and understood, and they achieved this restoration or enrichment of the life energy package. So how did the Rambam miss it? I don't know. But he didn't get it. It could have been the immersion in the Greek dominance of seichel, of mind, which was so strong in the Rambam that he just bypassed everything else and made it a concession to the time without really looking into it, even in the Ramban. Now it could be that he had the Ramban idea and he didn't like that. So that the Rambam is a tricky guy. The Rambam writes between the lines. So you've got to be careful to say, oh, the Rambam says this, and he means you to stay there. It could be he says this, it's there, but he means that if you think it through, you may come to another conclusion. And you find this in many different topics in the Rambam, where big, deep topics, where it looks like he affirms something, but upon more careful analysis, he doesn't. However, in this situation, it's to be expected. The Rambam is 12th century, 11th, 13th century, whatever. And in the first temple, in the second temple, there was something missing. The technology didn't work. The second temple was 100% cultic. And I say the first temple was also cultic. But Shlomo HaMelech, when we go from Shmuel, who says it was very sensitive, very worth to read and ponder Shmuel's whole approach to everything. He said, look, if you want to become a nation like other nations, with a polity and all the rest that goes with it, and a temple with animal worship, well, beware. You may be imitating and going against the whole understanding of Torah and the whole understanding of Hashem in the Torah system. So the point is that in the second temple, and also in the first temple, what has come down as the basic meaning of Korban is what the Rav talks about in the Rambam. In other words, the Korban was the way that a person came close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the goal. And as we talked about before, that involves self-negation. Who are you compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who am I compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So in Eov, in Job, all right, we should be following what the text says. Three people come to him and say, look, who are you? You know everything about yourself. You know the inner workings of your whole understanding and everything, your consciousness. You know that you didn't have a thought even? For a guy like you, a little stain on a white sheet is like a big black picture on a white sheet for some other guy. You're not a Rasha. You're considering a tzaddik. Now, to fool yourself and say you're a tzaddik when you're not, wow, that's bad. So who are you? Who are you to say? And they give him 3 lines of development. Gamzula Tova and this, whatever the lines are, and so on. And he says, no, I'm not listening to these guys. I know myself on this topic better than they know me. And because he said that, the text continues, and Hashem restored all the bracha that he took away and said, I'll show you, he showed to the Satan. I'll take away his success, his children, his family, all the good things in life that came from he being a Torah person or a non-Jew, whatever, religious person. But the point is, when it goes good, he's good. When it goes bad, I'll show you how he'll crumble. Okay, and he'll give it. And Job says, no. You got the wrong guy, not me. And because he denied those 3 lines of argument, he was restored with the bracha and everything. And so what was the point in chapter 33, those chapters in the Lamed, 33, 34, whatever? Where were you when I created the world? Hashem said, Elohim says to him, where were you when I created the world? You're putting yourself in the category of Borei HaOlam, who knows the laws, knows the whole world, inside and out and backward. I made it, he says. Who are you to have an opinion on the topic? So Eov says, like God asked, where were you when I created the world? So Eov says, well, if I were there, I wouldn't ask insoluble, unsoluble, pseudo questions. To ask that question is a pseudo question. Just like to ask why and continually ask why is a sophistic, which is a pseudo question, and Plato never refuted this office. Because the mind can always construct a why that looks reasonable and makes the question seem plausible and reasonable. But not every question is reasonable. There are such things as pseudo questions that have a grammatical form of a sentence. Mama, why? But are unanswerable. They're not answerable. So Eov says, well, if I were there, I wouldn't ask questions that have no answer. Sophistic types of questions. Okay, that's another story about interpretation of the Eov. But as you know, what's come down in Yahudut, in Judaism, has been acceptance of one of the three answers, and really going against the basic tenets of the text. Indeed, because it's very difficult, to say the least, it's very difficult to live, first, in a world of uncertainty, and second, in a world where there's no closure, that you say, well, I think somebody even put it, I can't bear to be God. In other words, in a literary type of a form, to say, look, who are you, God? Who are you to take such momentum and power on yourself that you negate everybody else? In effect, that's the self-affirmation part. That's what's coming through. So when Eov, it comes through and he says, who are you, God? Oh, now my favorite example, God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're doing a lousy job of running this universe. The poverty, the war, the sickness, the death, the people, the in relationships, where we are in the big picture. That's not worthy of you. I may try my own hand at a few things. I may be better than you. Who are you to do that? Where's your great universe? In other words, that motif and that aspect is there in the picture. So what I'm saying is, if you look at Bayit Shlishi from the perspective of coming down from the Shemayim, being laws, real laws at the base of the whole complete life system, and the Korban being a technology of the life. I say technology, it's really the wrong word. It's an invention. Because technology means you have the laws and you apply the laws. You know the laws, and you have the laws of mechanics. You apply the laws and you make a building, make a bridge. Okay? And I called invention or workables things that the human being somehow invented but does not know the laws. So in my view, the human being invented agricultural procedures. They don't know the life laws of the vegetative system. We're first beginning. And people who are in it understand how little we know about the life system. I told you once, Prigogine, who won the Nobel Prize for Biology, he said that until we understand the human life system, we can't understand the animal life system. Darwin and Darwinian evolution understanding, in my book, it's not even science. It's a generalization from a pattern of data that was collected with measurement over long time scales and breaks in the time scales and so on and so on and so on. Where's the mathematization? Where's this? You call it a physics? It's a joke. When I used to go to a cocktail party as a young professor there, very important. Once every 6 months they make a party. Couldn't drink, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything. Okay. All right, so you can stay with a hat, nobody bothers you, but you couldn't drink, could have a scotch, couldn't do that, Okay, so then what would you do? You'd walk around and say, oh, you know this one, you know that one, and you say hello, and you don't know this one, that. And of course, and as people got 2 or 3 drinks, all of a sudden you notice, ding, there were 4 corners of the room. And one corner we're talking about family and different things, and some in another corner we're talking about work, and the guys who go, the physicists, the mathematicians, and lo and behold, in the other corner was the psychologists. Oh, what a joke! The physicists are in one corner, like a boxing ring. The physicists are in one corner, talking quantum physics and formulas and this and that, where we should be going. And people in psychology, and sociology, and anthropology, and even economics, but we'll give it a break for the time being, we're talking in the other corner. And the twain shall never meet. What are you kidding me? Talk to a physicist. And talk about psychology, and ask for laws, and ask for... You got regularities, organized common sense, that's what we call it. So, aside from the picture, but that's the thing. So, what I'm saying here is, Bayit Shlishi refers not to a bayit, not to people sacrificing animals or not animals, where the videotape would be similar to what you would get from a videotape that would come down from the Second Temple. And I am very strong to use such harsh words, but I really firmly believe that it's a total chilul haTorah if that should come to pass. Or, to make it milder, if, for some understanding package, that we get the Einstein of biology, and we get the breakthrough in the life system, and in that breakthrough, there is required something of a building with special features and so, okay, then I back off. But if that looks wild, just absurd, but then there's a reason to back off. But otherwise, what are we talking about? What it will look like, we don't know what it's going to look like. Well, before the computer came in and you got it on everybody's screen, on everybody's table, and the room was empty. I mean, you had a TV, and that's the story. All of a sudden, next to your TV, there's another screen, and now we make apartments, and right, we make apartments, and we make sure there's a place for a speaker, and this and that, and so on and so on. What it's going to look like, who knows? But that it will look like something is built into this understanding. So, to come back to the overall theme of tonight, well, on the one hand, to commemorate Tisha BAv as a great loss, and Bayit Shlishi as the way it's been understood as the restoration of that. Well, that to me is a terrible thing. On the other hand, the same situation, Bayit Shlishi, is the greatest, unbelievable work, shall we call it. Work to be done by humanity, and especially by Klal Yisrael, and especially in Eretz Yisrael, on the Or Meitzion, which will come forth from the Jewish nation in the context, which will stand alone in the beginning, and at the end, every nation will back into Torah, because it will understand that all along, Yahadut, Torah had this focus of attention and struggled for centuries with metaphysics and with philosophy against the workables and the technology that comes from empirical regularities. You cannot compare what comes out of the technology. Medicine in the 20th century will look like the Dark Ages from the perspective of the new biology, the new physiology, new embryology, which will underlay the techniques that will constitute the new medicine. We will look like dark ages. How could we believe such things? You know, like I'm learning now because of the pill, you know. It's a society of pill. Society of pill. I must take a pill.
Oof.
To vary the pill, why should I have to take it every day? So I skip it one day. It's going to kill me. I mean, well, but that's a fight. See, you have to say, oh, what are we talking about? I mean, it's a pill world. You know, they can't count for this, and they can't account for that, and they can't account for this. And so why not shake it up one day? That's going to kill me. You know, so I'm just saying, you learn it from practical experience of a year of having to take a pill. I never took a pill in my life.
You're taking pills now, right?
Then I got to take 3 pills a day, whatever it is. Okay. Well, so you give the benefit of the doubt. Well, are you kidding me? The complications involved in each individual's life and everything after a stroke, before, are so complicated. Each individual is a world. Each individual has all kinds of aspects. You know. Okay, do a favor to the world, to the medical. Take a pill, but don't get crazy. Don't get to just end on a personal note. They want, because I have, once in a while I get these little rough, so they like to burn it off because of cancer worry, of skin cancer. So they went to the doctor and he prescribed a schmear that you do on the whole arm. And what was it? Kind of an acid. You put it on, and you use it for a number of times. Then you wait a month, and you put it on again. And you wait 2 months, and you put it on again. And that is supposed to help you heal. Well, I would rather live with the few spots on the arm, okay, and a few spots over here, than to take a medication which has in it something that has these stages, and it's so bad that you have to wait 2 months for the healing. Now, I have light skin. If I were a normal person, maybe there would be a pull. Like my brother is dark. Okay, so if you have darker skin, pigmentation, but I have very light skin. It could be, in striving for perfection, to eliminate everything, I may wind up behind the 8 ball. And it's nothing to do with other type medicine, with fringe medicine. It's just unrational sense. You know, why should I go take a chance? Why should I go take a chance when doing something to eliminate a few spots here or rough, you know?
Turn into an albino.
Yeah. Turn into albino. And it's the same with other things. As I mentioned once in passing, I only have vision in one eye. So the guy says, well, you're getting beginning cataracts. So I said, what do you do? Well, eventually, as you know, it forces you for operation. They've succeeded tremendously in cataract operations with laser. Well, that's for the average guy. For somebody who has one eye, only sees peripheral vision. Well, I don't know if I'll be so fast to jump for an operation. I don't know if I could jump so fast. And the cases that I heard of, and just even recently, just happened to pile up this year, of people that I know that passed away, and someone, the mistakes that were made in the hospital are unbelievable in terms of number and the quality of the thing. And just recently somebody told me the story, and they had to go through and they cut something that wasn't supposed to be, and there were internal bleeding, and the person was hovering between life and death. Now, I'm not criticizing and just saying the whole thing is no good, but each individual person has to make a judgment in relation to him. So I can't read. That's going to happen. Let's say it doesn't happen. It happens for a while, because it goes slow and so on. But let's assume you get to a point you can't really see. One of my friends there, he couldn't see, had to take an operation. Fortunately, he came through, and Baruch Hashem, he's okay. But now reading, I mean, that's important. If somebody tells me to read something, I do my homework, you know. Okay, so we'll face the problem when we come to it. So maybe somebody will read, maybe this. I saw a program on television, you know, on the computer, in the educational field. They have these beautiful things. You talk and it comes out in print. And you print and it comes out in talk.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I put a piece of paper, as a trial, I put a piece of paper in, all of a sudden the voice comes on. I said, that's not me! But it started to read the point. The point being, again, each individual is a world, and a complex world, and indeed the struggle of humanity to solve the cancer problem, which has had billions of dollars since 1945, and when Watson wrote his book on molecular biology in 1973, and the last chapter was on cancer research, he says, we're in trial and error. For a guy like Watson, DNA molecule, for a guy like Watson to include in his book 1973 on molecular genetics, right on the shelf here, and include in it that we are in trial and error, like Edison searched for filament by taking a blister to put them on the table and took one by one and checked them out to see if they would glow and so on. Well, boy, that's nothing to do with science. We're far away. Trial and error is the way we learn to open the door. It's organized common sense. But for somebody to admit in 1973 that we're a few little things here and there, but we're far away. Well, Benji, my son, working there in New York on cancer research, now it's all genetic. The paradigm has shifted. It's moved into genetic. And the going is not so fast as one would think it's going to go. I always said, solve the cancer problem, get fired. They don't need you anymore. There's where we are. Anyway, to conclude for tonight, the point was that if we just think and start with this organizational scheme of commemoration or celebration, what we have in the different stages that I try to present are celebrative or good thing coming out, not so good thing coming out, and the third temple, which doesn't leave well enough alone with Tefillah, Bimkom Korban. The third temple has in it both dimensions. If we look at it one way, to me, it's a big chilul haTorah. If we look at it in another way, it's the greatest bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can give to humanity and to Klal Yisrael. To be able to work and focus attention on the most difficult question in science, which is, what is the life system? Which, as the centuries rolled on, and especially in Chazal that we're now inheriting the whole center of Yisrael, the hope for restoration began to increase and play a big role in the Jewish people and the survival of the Jewish people and so forth. That's a separate issue. We're not going to talk about that tonight, as to what were the ingredients in Klal Yisrael such that they were able to rebound from so many situations of destruction or semi-destruction. What were the ingredients in Klal Yisrael? Were they belief ingredients? Were they emotional sensitivity? Was it practicality, that they were, in a sense, they were able to separate off ideas from workables, from problems and problems to be solved? That deserves a separate treatment, and we'll do it at some time on a broad historical scale as to what the success was. And just b'derech hagav, the practicality of being the money lenders, and in the beginning the glass blowers. I read a beautiful piece that in the early centuries, glass blowing was known only to the Hebrews. And therefore they had some in, as the time went on, they had some in with royalty of being able to blow glass. Okay, that's a separate issue. But now we're talking about hope for restoration. Okay. That's beginning to start on the positive side. That we had a destruction, but okay. We could have knuckled under and become so involved in depression that we would never be able to pull out. Instead of that, there was this renewed hope for restoration. Okay. I personally, as you know, I consider this entry into Chazal, namely the world of the Talmud, I personally consider that to be on a par with Newton's apple, where one of the great, if not the greatest intellectual contribution to Western civilization is the nomos, a narrative which we call the Talmud. The legal detail. Okay, next week we celebrate. Well, you got it. Next week we celebrate Tisha BAv. And I say celebrate or commemorate. That's going to be the focus and the organization of this talk tonight. Keep it in the back of your mind as we go through the different points, whether we're talking celebration or we're talking commemoration. In simple terms, the difference is that we celebrate something that's a good for Yisrael, a good for the individual, and so on. And we commemorate things that were not so good. Okay, so now we're in Tisha BAv. Tisha BAv commemorates the destruction of the Second Temple, and with it, the sovereignty of Yisrael, which at that time was built around the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, now that's obviously a commemoration and not a celebration. Even though, historically, the impact of the destruction of the temple, of the Second Temple, apparently was not as bad and as potent as it's been made out to be heretofore. The contemporary historian in historical research points out that there was somehow a very quick, in those terms, maybe 70 years, 50 years, a very quick recovery from the destruction and even Beitar and the Roman destruction and the welcoming of Chazal, of the institution of Tisha BAv and the Rabbanim. So this is something just to keep in mind historically, that it wasn't as it was played up to be, because I learned from the couple of books that I read on the topic, I took it for granted that the impact was unbelievably devastating. Apparently it wasn't that much. However, in the terms of tonight, that is definitely a commemoration, we remember. Okay, but built into that, there's an emerging hope for restoration, embedded in a ideational structure wherein the aspects and the bases are discussed in what we call Tisha BAv and the Agadah and so forth. So this, I consider it a tremendous thing, event, and indeed the beginning or the entry into the primacy of Chazal after the destruction is something to celebrate. It's something great. It's not to commemorate. Okay. But again, these come off with the destruction. Okay. Destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. The end of animal sacrifice. And other forms of korban, but especially the animal sacrifice. Now, I couldn't read Vayikra. When I went to shul and they were reading Vayikra, I used to stand up, take a book in English, especially, so they see I'm not studying a sefer or something, take a book and hold it up, and go like this, and go around, and show everybody that I'm not following the reading. I could not follow the reading of 2-3 chapters in Vayikra with any reasonability of knowing reading the English or not knowing the words or whatever, but the whole picture that comes through said to me, that can't be so significant, that can't be so important. And indeed, it's something backwards. And then, of course, I read the Rambam, which we'll talk about a little later, and in the famous Rambam, he says that the work of sacrifices in Israel was a concession to the time. The environment was such that other nations had temples and sacrifices, and in order for the Jews, Israel, the Hebrews, to make some kind of a continued existence and success, they had to institute sacrifices, but it's really a substitute was tefillah bimkom korban, prayer instead of sacrifices. And that was an advance. We'll talk about that a little bit later, a little bit about the Ramban controversy. The sacrifice, the animal sacrifice, was a symbolic representation or a symbolization of the person bringing the korban, such that he would identify with the animal when the animal was killed. So this was in effect he being punished or being killed for the Aveira or for whatever he's coming to sacrifice for. And that involved, as a fundamental tenet, the self-negation of the person. Now, I might as well introduce that point now. When we read the Chumash, I discovered that the paradigm case of sacrifice is korban shogeg, namely unintentional wrongdoing. This is embedded in the 6 or 8 types of sacrifice that are listed in Vayikra. Now, it's very difficult to say, well, how do you get the idea that shogeg is the paradigm? It's not the first, for example, and it's amidst the rest. In my view, in the historical picture, much of what's written in the Chumash, be it Devarim itself, the whole Sefer, or other pieces of the text, were written later than Moshe Rabbeinu's time. And indeed, when it comes to this list and description of the different korbanot, I myself the only sense I make in reasonability is that these korbanot are being projected onto the text of the Mishkan. We're not dealing with a temple, but they're being projected from the temple period. So that the list of korbanot in the Chumash are not necessarily de facto the type of korban that was operative in Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, you can't prove something like that because, I mean, you're dealing with a text on this particular point. But that is certainly an advance. So out of this destruction came something that somebody like the Rambam was a big advance and a great bracha for Yisrael. Okay. So as I say, I couldn't read the text in the shul. Of course, 40 years later, I consider that text in Vayikra to be most important because it deals with the topic of korban, including the animal sacrifice. Why that's the case, we will see towards the end of the discussion. Okay, but this was the story. So we have a thankfulness for tefillah bimkom korban, and we have this built solidly on the Rambam. So in Rav Soloveitchik's book, one of his books, he brings down the point in the guide. Maimonides sees in sacrifice just an educational method of elevating the Jews above such forms of worship. This is the Rav's words. It's not the text, but it's informative to hear how the Rav packages it in the note. So previously, sacrifice had been the common practice of the heathens among whom the Jews had lived. In order to direct the Jew forward towards worship of God, the Torah made the concession of animal sacrifices. Ramban, Nachmanides, severely criticizes Maimonides for his rationalization and introduced his own interpretation. Sacrifice for him, for the Ramban, refers actually to man himself. Worship is nothing but mental sacrifice. And animal sacrifice symbolizes the internal act of self-negation. Now, we should stop to ponder the machloket. First of all, the Rambam puts it educational. It's an educational thing, and it's a concession for the continued existence of Klal Yisrael. And the Ramban disagrees strongly and says that this procedure called the korban